we are here. Another update, another conundrum getting the stream to go working in some manner. But made it, sort of. Alrighty. Let me see, I got several brushes I want to try out on this thing. I'll go with this guy. I don't know what it is. Every time I get to streaming, my throat's like, hey, you want to absolutely screw up? And I'm like, no. And it's like, too bad. Let's see if anybody gets in here. Let me try some stuff out while getting prepped for this. I wonder if I can't. I don't know. The hot pot. Gross. No mistaking the smell of freaking super glue. In the nostrils when you don't mean to. I didn't think about when I was basing the standard size Shadow Cat about basing the elemental. And that it would require extra stuff. Always something unaccounted for. Nope, that didn't work. I always have a problem gluing cork in place. Let's see what happens. If I can ever actually get anything to work right. Doesn't help that gel super glue takes a while. Where did anything go? Oh, it's right here. I knew that. And use this as a bit of a leveler over here. The foist pass. Doesn't need to be perfect. The idea is merely to kind of, when it's fully dry and contracts and does whatever, put another layer on top and actually put flock down. Although I could probably put flock down now. Let's stick the cork to everything, except where I want it to stick to. There. In for a penny, in for a pound, I guess. Where did I put the stuff that I need? I get glue all over my fingers. Where did I put that stuff? It's not exactly something you want to knock over. Oh, here it is. This is some old flock from GW. That I'll just gather and then put any glue on the thing underneath it. We'll multi-layer this thing. I can open the glue up. Gross. So what happens when you don't think about it? And so you don't water down any glue in advance. Or any of that fun stuff. If it all holds, then that'll be Really nice. Let me let that fully dry and cure and whatnot. Shake off the rest. And we have ourselves a merry little Christmas. Or something. Put that off to the side. Because that's not the actual focus. How does this get like this? There we go. That makes my brain feel better. Ah. All right, where is that? I feel like I could give the Gauss rifle, however you want to say it, a little extra attention on this regular size Shadow Cat. If I only knew where any of my stuff went. That's what happens when you decide, I'm going to clean up. And you don't pay attention. Just imagine. Where, oh where? It's not like... Is that it? Not really. really, but the size might work. Let me see. Yeah, okay. So we carefully just extend his barrel depth. Because I don't know where my actual pin vise drill went. The one that I like using. Is that it? There it is. I'm not looking to make it too hollow or anything, just to core it out a little bit to give the effect that it's a barrel. Because it is. If this was a laser or something, I wouldn't do that. But it's a Gauss. So that gives the effect better. Alright, so I went ahead and I have raw sienna here as an oil paint. And I wanted to try something different than doing like typical burnt sienna or some type of umber. As you can see, with the mineral spirits, it makes... It's not quite like a cursed earth or anything like that. It's a little yellowy, but I think it'll work well for like a ruddy style of like... It's not a barren wasteland color, nor is it thriving, fertile dirt per se. It's somewhere in the middle. I don't know. I think it'll be nice over a base. So the Shadowcat, that's not going to stay green. It's just that the old kind of classic flock wood is green. So putting paint over that will do a couple of things. It'll help the glue in sealing it, and then it'll get the colors I'm looking for. That'll get a bit of a dry brush to almost like a desertish style of base. I'm not looking to go full on desert per se. I'm thinking I'm looking to do desert-ish style and see how this plays with it. I can always put a little bit of a black, make another one with a little more black in it, or not a little bit more. I have zero black in it. Another one with some black in it, and that could really be a basing type of deal. I'm looking to have it... I don't want to do your typical urban rubble, which is gray, for the big reason that my mechs are going to be gray, right? And I would like to have it not blend in. I'd like to have them stand out. But I'm not looking to do your typical like jungly, foresty dirt or typical barren wasteland dirt. But rather, if you've done any Mech Warrior games, especially like Mech Warrior 5 stuff, you have like a little arid, perhaps, more of a tannish brown, light brown tan kind of earth right around urban sectors. So I want to do something like that. I think that made sense. So I'm hoping that the raw sienna will play well with that. But that's just oil paints, and you want to get this mineral wash. Not mineral wash, mineral spirits. Or white spirit. It's pure odorless mineral spirits to mix with your oil paints. And it acts kind of like if you use like enamel washes, like I don't know, like this engine oil stuff from AK, or Kursk Earth, which is not the same color at all, but these are great. They're enamels, so I would need an enamel thinner because these are definitely old and thickening up and whatnot. They work great for what they are, but them and oil washers are very, or can have a very, very low surface tension, which is very nice. Very kind of whimsical, if you will, in terms of just flowing into like capillary action type stuff. So that's part of why I wanted things to be smooth and to carve out my lines for panels where I got a little bit too gung-ho, you could say. But we're looking, feeling pretty good, pretty cleaned up with the doodads. So this is Mr. Surfacer. Give me a good mix. It's definitely settled. This definitely has a smell to it that I would definitely say would warrant a mask, particularly for airbrushing, because of just what it is. So I'll put that and let that kind of hang out by this little dish. We'll need more of this, but I always like the idea of not just letting it dry out. So I have some Mr. Color Thinner, and I have a pipette. I'm going to take some. We're not going to use all what's in the pipette, but I'm just going to try to wet down what the mixer more or less did, because I do want to try and salvage all the paint I can, just because why waste when you don't have to waste. So this stuff's pretty thin right out the gate. You don't really need the mixer or the thinner, especially if you're going to be using like an airbrush. I mean, a paintbrush like I am. With an airbrush, you might want to thin it down a little bit, but this is rather thin for a paintbrush. Why am I using a paintbrush? I didn't want to set up I didn't want to go out into the garage today. Set up the airbrush is more or less set up. I didn't want to get it all prepped and ready to flow, just to airbrush everything down, then have to wait and let it all dry and airbrush it again, then clean the airbrush out and rinse and repeat the process. So I didn't. And on top of that, you definitely can use a paintbrush with this stuff. While this surfacer, this primer, if you will, and the paints, the Gaia Notes paints that I'm going to be using on everything are more well known for airbrush usage, it's not a requirement. They can and do work with paintbrush, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to give it a shot with a paintbrush, an earnest shot, to see how it feels, because not everybody's gonna have a paintbrush. I mean, an airbrush. Everybody's gonna have a paintbrush for hobbies like this. Whether you're doing 40K, Battletech, doesn't matter. This is really thin, where it's really not going to gunk up detail to just kind of lay it on a little bit thick. And this is just a primer coat, so I'm not worried about it being a perfect spotless coat, but I am going to take my time with it. It's super smooth though. Super smooth. I don't know how well it's going to show. But, you know, everybody likes to say, oh, airbrushes aren't expensive. Airbrushes aren't expensive. Everybody should invest in an airbrush in this hobby. And I don't necessarily disagree with those statements. Airbrushes, for just doing base coating, and like priming, base coating, sealing with varnishes, an airbrush to do that is very cheap, all things considered, and it's pretty economical in the long run because you use the paints that you don't have to get like spray cans if you're gonna do that, and it can be more efficient to a degree with doing stuff like this, sort of, with an airbrush, or at least, you know, efficient with your time and everything. But there is the concept of storage and usage, and despite how you might see people do it just out and about on a workbench like this, you do want to spray it in some type of box or booth, especially paints like this. And so I'd say for acrylics, it's very accessible. I mean, the airbrush is going to be the same, but if you're using acrylics, it's going to feel much more sensible to use one of those and get them, and they're pretty cheap. But, you know, if you live in an apartment, you may not have the space to set up an airbrush booth or whatever. You want to definitely make sure you're not spraying onto your floor or onto your tables or anything. So you got to be really careful that way. And, you know, you got to consider it is an extra investment, extra space. And it's not like it's huge. I would say high 90% of people could, you know, in this hobby, could pick up a really cheap airbrush with like a built-in compressor setup for basing. Because really, at the end of the day, we're talking about priming. We're talking about maybe putting the first base color down, maybe getting frisky with it and pre-shading, and that's about it. And then putting down like a varnish coat. And that, like the amount of time I'm spending here, I could have had, you know, most of the arm base coated by now, of one arm, and same thing with this arm. But A, not everybody's going to want to use an airbrush. Totally understand that. B, it do be like that when it comes to cost. It may be as cheap as like $50 to be able to actually start airbrushing. But, you know, $50 is $50. Let's be real. If your budget for your hobby is basically $50 period for like a while, are you going to want to spend it on a thing to do the hobby and not be able to do your hobby? You know, it's a trade-off. I guess at the end of the day, I do think airbrushes are a great investment, a great tool to have, but I think it can lead to what I refer to as like airbrush laziness for certain things, where yeah, I totally see their justification and they're great. I've used them, but I mean, we're getting it done. It's getting coverage, and this is a 1/60th scale thing, right? Where I definitely want an airbrush, but it's getting covered, no problem. So, you know, something like this Shadow Cat, which isn't even in a proper holder, because I don't know where I put it. Oh, I forgot the Space Marines in it. Gotta work on that too. Might take a break from these lacquer type stuff to do that. But you know, if you're careful with these thinner paints, with, you know, in terms of breathing and whatnot, and you be clean about it, you're gonna get a nice smooth finish with a paintbrush. So just use a paintbrush if you don't want to get an airbrush yet. I think once you get set up in a place where you feel more secure with your surroundings, your finances, what you might even be allowed to do, not because an apartment might have rules against it, but because you might live at home, you know, whatever the case is, once you get comfortable and everything with all that, absolutely pick up an airbrush. Why not? But I mean, this is looking smooth with the paintbrush because this paint is really thin with good coverage. Trade-off is you really don't want to breathe it in, and you can't use water with it, so I'm not. But it's looking really good. I actually expected it to dry darker than what it's doing. Not that that's a problem per se, but I do want to. Gray is going to be the color, and this isn't the gray I'm looking for, so I mean, it should make a lighter gray that much easier to see. But I mean, I'm just not haphazardly. I'm not being super critical or tactical, if you will, on my paint application, and I'm not too worried about gunking up detail because of how thin this paint is. This is my first time really working with this paint. I've heard good things about it from the scale model community, Gunpla and the like. So I wanted to do things a bit differently. Everything I'm doing can be done with acrylics. With a lot easier because you can just thin it with water, things of that nature. Don't have to worry too much. Something like this, I would advise definitely a mask for airbrushing 100%, and even just doing this could benefit from a mask if you wanted to. Don't go huffing it, I guess is what I'll say. But certain paints really are airbrush only paints, I feel like, at least in my experience. Alclads, for example, I've utilized, and out of curiosity I tried like a paintbrush in the Alclad's black base coat thing for the metallic stuff, and you really need an airbrush for that. It covers great in an airbrush, but on a paintbrush it doesn't do anything. Maybe I didn't mix it enough, I don't know. Maybe because it was old. But I've used it in an airbrush and it's amazing. And the paintbrush, it just kind of really fell flat. So, super, imagine black having the coverage problems of like yellow. And that's what I was having with a paintbrush. But with an airbrush, it was like, no, we're covered just fine. Real fast and easy like. This is not one of those times. Now, I do believe this comes in different colors. I went with a neutral gray because I was doing a gray, and I didn't want to put it over a black that would really darken things down. I don't want to necessarily have it. I wanted something most neutral, where the color would be most likely to be its own color on top of it and not be darkened or lightened, if that makes any sense. I'm going to have to come back to this, but it's space coated. So what? I spent a few extra minutes, and I wasn't even, intently focused on it. So I haven't done anything for this mech in terms of cleaning it up, because I really couldn't see much with the base plastic on this sander size shadow cap. But if you look up in here, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it too well. There's like a mold line on the arm, and you can already touch that. It's already dry. Where are you? There you are. There's a mold line there that I'll take the time and due diligence to clean up. Sometimes I find it worthwhile to put your primer / base coat down first, because I feel like that can reveal things that you just couldn't really see for cleanup purposes. And that did, in that case here, do that. So I'm going to let this fully dry. I'll clean it up and then do a final base coat on it, and we'll be good to go. In the meantime, I could do more with these arms. It definitely feels thicker than it is, if that makes any sense. Like, I could probably thin it down a little bit. And I think it's because it's not so much that it feels thick, it feels like drying out, if that makes any sense. So we just reconstituted a bit, and already it feels better on the brush here. And it feels better on the brush painting. It has a very different feel once you start spreading it out and you get the coverage very much where it's going to be. I don't want to say sticky, but if you ever spread something almost like a gel, but it's not a gel, in this case, if that makes any sense. It's not affecting anything at all. In fact, it's still doing it. I'll need a second coat. With an airbrush, you'll get really good coverage where you won't need that. But with a paintbrush, you're spreading it out. And the airbrush is able to kind of almost aerosolize it more or less and spray it on, so you can do really good, careful coverage and get a nice full coat without having to do another pass in a lot of cases, especially for a primer. But with a paintbrush, you're really spreading it out, dragging it along, so you do need to do a little bit extra coat-wise stuff. The nice thing about this mud coat is that it makes it a lot easier to tell where I painted and where I haven't, because this is your base, at least my base plastic filament color. So they're kind of similar, especially on camera. So, having the ability to really discern where I painted is huge. And you still want to be careful when you're painting, you want to let this fully dry. Take a look at it, make sure you're not getting any brush stroke marks on there. And it seems to kind of self-level itself a bit, so you're not really going to get that, which is nice. But given how thin this really ultimately is, I can come back in there and do a minor sanding if I have to, or do and reapply. That was a lot of thinner. Might be too much thinner, honestly. But we'll experiment and see. Yeah, it's way too much thinner. Whoopsies. I mean, the big thing about why you would want to airbrush this kind of base coat thing down is to avoid having to smooth out brushstroke stuff. As long as you don't lay it on too thick, you really won't have to worry too much about that. And this Mr. Surfacer, you can do some really fine sanding of it and kind of combat the whole sanding thing a little bit. I mean, not sanding, the whole brushstroke thing a little bit, especially if you get a little too haphazard. I'm not being as quote-unquote careful as I could or should, because I'm chit-chatting to nobody, and I'm also just going with it and seeing what happens. Having the ability to sand it down without losing anything except time is something that I'm aware of, that I have that ability. So I'm being a little more cavalier about my tests, which is good, because not everything should be done with surgical precision and focus. Sometimes you just want to put some paint on a model. You shouldn't have to act like I'm hacking the mainframe every time. This is definitely feeling like less is more. Go ahead and do the second coat if you have to, and you don't want to throw too much on there. You also don't want to continually work it like you might with acrylics, because it'll just not peel it back, but it'll that's self-leveling very nicely, and I put a little bit too thick on those places, so that's pretty good. I like that. It's a learning experience. Like I said, I'm more used to acrylics. I haven't really used paint like this on anything. So here we are. And I want to be clear, I'm not going to just use this surfacer and then lacquer-based paints only. I'm going to use acrylics. Like, I don't have any lacquer green. I'm going to use acrylic for that. And I'm going to try to do certain effects with acrylics and whatever else, because I know it'll work. But while you can put lacquer over acrylic, you have to just let the acrylic fully cure. So like, how you would paint, wait for it to quote unquote dry, and then put a second coat on and not be any worried about it. You can't do that if you're going to paint a lacquer over an acrylic. You can do it, But you basically got to give the acrylic truly proper curing time. I wouldn't be surprised if you let it sit for like overnight even, and then come in with your lacquer, because the lacquer's kind of hot as the paint goes. Right now I'm just trying to get most of it off the brush as I can, just to see what happens, and then I'll get more paint. This stuff has some self-leveling properties in it. You can definitely goop it and gloop it, but that's going to be tougher. So you can just kind of spread it around and let it kind of do its thing and then come back in. You don't have to worry too much. And again, this particularly is just a primer coat. The actual color is going to go over this. So I can be a little, at least in my mind, I'm justifying being a little cavalier about this. I'm also using it as like a good benchmark test for things like panel lines and detail, and how well and smooth did I truly make things. Like after I put paint on it, will I notice something? So far, I think I did a pretty good job. Not to toot my own horn. I just got to get used to how this paint is and not overwork it. I'm so used to acrylics where you can just constantly kind of brush it in because it has a longer dry time. This stuff starts tacking up, if you will, and drying quite quickly. But if you get it too thick, it does take some time. I've noticed that. Not gonna lie, I have seen a couple of videos. I know I do my research a little bit on this type of paint being used with a brush, but most of them, for doing big cover stuff, I always see airbrush, and I was worried that I was gonna have a nightmare of a time getting coverage and whatnot. I had flashbacks to the Alcalad 2 situation where I was just as a goof testing it. But aside the fact that I gotta dial in exactly the mixture of thinner to paint, it's doing good. It's doing good. Just go ahead and paint it on without even moving it. Try to keep it in camera frame. If I was painting I am painting solo, but I mean, if I was painting not trying to have it on stream for anybody who wander in, it would be all up in my face, really looking into it. So I'm not going to do too much like that, but it's amazing how much faster a process like this is with actual paints versus doing mud and whatnot. Well, the mud process for me was important, but that was tedious and took a while, and took sanding and whatnot. And I know I'm off camera, but nobody's here to yell at me. You can yell at me in the comments. Well, for me, the sanding was worth it because things are just feeling really good painting wise. I'm not really noticing anything once it's dry. It looks pretty flat as in smooth. So that's really cool. And there's no real particular reason I'm using this. I did my 1/60th scale Timberwolf in most all standard wargaming acrylics from Citadel, and then a little bit of some other companies, but mostly Citadel. And it looks great. Like it covered fine, did everything fine, used an airbrush and everything as well, no problem. So this isn't like a required thing to do for something like this. I wanted to experience what all the Gunpla people were experiencing, more or less deliberately. They do with airbrushes and a lot more talent than what I have, but Not that I don't do Gunpla, I have. I just haven't done it in years, literal like decade plus amount of time. And all I did was a Tall Geese. I made a Tall Geese 1 out of the Tall Geese 2/3 kit, and then I did Char's Zaku 2, and that's all. Because of my moving around, the Zaku 2 is missing some components, and I don't know where they are. And because I was doing moving around, I don't know where all of my Gelgoog pieces are to try and finish that up from over a decade ago. But, yeah, no Gundams, actually, despite the fact that, you know, I definitely enjoy them. But, that's okay. I figure, why not gunplify my Battletech a little bit? So that's what I'm here doing with these paints and everything. There's decent working time in there too. I'm not rushing it, and you know, the thinner lasts decently well there, so it keeps the paint constituted. And a little bit of thinner can reconstitute this paint, so you want to be kind of careful repainting over sections. But, you know, sometimes that's what the doctor ordered. Come here, Shadow Cat. It's crazy what one coat of paint can do. It's just a primer coat, but this Shadow Cat already looks a whole lot better than just being bare plastic. But it reminds me, that feels a bit too thick. It's a coarse grit. I would like a less coarser gritter. Without having, I thought I had like 2 of each. I haven't opened up a whole new box. The problem is I don't want to contaminate, quote unquote, the filing with the stuff that I used for the mud, but I'm about to do that. So all I'm trying to do really is make the mold line on the barrel here less noticeable. I don't really see anything super egregious anywhere else. And this is not a knock on the sculpt or anything. This is actually really nice, all things considered. So I'm really pleased with the end result. I'm just trying to take as good of care as possible. Why can't I speak lately? Where's that mold line scraper? I don't like using the X-Acto blade for it because the X-Acto blade gets, you know, ruined quicker, and I don't want to have to really worry about it. I'm being really gentle with it. I'm really just trying to, like, if I see plastic, I know I scraped enough because the paint was over the mold line itself. And so I'm good to go. And I can't tell if it's getting hard to see because my eyes are just atrocious, which is true, or because I've cleaned it up. Both are true, so it's hard to tell. It's because it's super fine grit, so I'm not too worried about screwing up something. I want to see how this feels on actual model. This glass thing. Well, it's definitely taking stuff off. Feels good and smooth though. It's definitely polishing it up. You want to be careful on the detail. Okay. Maybe a little bit on this edge here. Something around here. It's definitely making a polish. And it's definitely gunking it up, but that's fine because I know I can clean it. Let's put that away. Now let's see how the paint's acting. Not too bad. Still rather thin and whatnot. So let's repaint over this and see how it looks on this Shadow Cat. Well, I definitely didn't get all of it. I'll come back when it's fully dry again, but really I gotta come back on one section. The rest is looking good. So job well done. Now it's a small scale, so you won't really notice it just by looking at it, but these are mechs. These are models that you know you're gonna pick up and look at closer, so why not take the extra time to do the detail right? Especially as I am not in any real rush. I don't know if it's because it's heavy on the thinner, but I actually stripped off some of the paint, some of the primer here. A lesson from when I actually put color down. Maybe I'll let it do it like that and see what happens. And then put the rest somewhere else so I don't waste the paint on the brush. I actually kind of like working with this stuff better than the acrylics. It doesn't, like, the brush doesn't feel gunked up at all when I let it sit there. Probably don't want to mix and match the paints too much on the brushes. Obviously you clean them in between, but it feels pretty good. I'm liking that. We'll see how it is once I become more acclimated with it, but thus far, initial impressions are positive. It's just starting to thicken up a little bit on the palette there. I call it a palette, on the thingy there. I'll have to put more thinner down. But that little bit of paint I put on there, I mean, I really didn't put that much paint on there. It would be a lot more efficient with an airbrush to get back to that. But it feels pretty good, all things considered, even doing it with a paintbrush. I feel like I'd use a lot more acrylic paint versus this stuff in terms of for the progress I've made so far. Kind of like I was saying earlier, you know, to nobody, but you can definitely use standard acrylics here, and you're not going to miss out on any capabilities. You can do loads of really fantastic looking stuff with just acrylics. I'm just doing this because I wanted to try different paint. I've heard really good things about the Guy Knows paints, and this primer I think is a great primer, even if you're going to do acrylics, because while you need to let the acrylics really fully cure before you put lacquers over them, and it's not ideal, but you can do it. once these lacquer paints fully dry up, which is pretty quick, you can go ahead and paint acrylics over it, no problem. So if you want a really, really thin primer coat on your Custodes or whatever it is, they come in black. It just comes in black and other numbers. I think 1000 is quote unquote the grit, or how much quote unquote filler type stuff it is. And they have even thinner, and I think more coarser or whatever. But my point is, you can get it in a gray, a black, and I think a pure white. I'm not sure, but I know gray and black are an option of Mr. Surfacer types. And this will, and that way you can put down whatever one you want, and then once that's done, you can do your acrylics over it, no problem. Metallics, you can probably put alcohol-based paint over it too, no problem. I think in the realm of hotness of paint, meaning like paint that could chew through other paint and whatever else, I think acrylics at the top, like, you know, is the hottest of the ones that we use in this realm of painting. And I think acrylics are the lowest, so I think you can put anything over a lacquer for the most part without too much worry. You obviously wouldn't want to test it and abuse it, but I don't think you would need to worry about doing any special coverage or anything like that, like a varnish or something, which is always also an option too. You can always do that too. So there's that. A little bit more thinner. Just a couple of drops. Alright, that was 4 drops. We'll see how that does. Reconstitutes what's in here. Now the big thing, aside of maybe you being a bit more efficient on paint, is that if I was airbrushing this, I'd be done by now. But I wouldn't be able to stream it or even video it really, because where it is, you wouldn't really get to see much. The lighting for where I have my airbrush set up is kind of bad. So, I mean, I can make it better for purposes of me seeing, but it's not going to do well for camera at all. Not that it matters, not everything is for the camera, obviously. I'm just saying, since I'm doing it here on camera right now. Let's get some paint on this thing, right? So the scheme so far is going to be Alpha Galaxy on these. On all the stuff. The basic Shadowcat, this big one, the other big mechs I'm going to be working on. The goal is to do Alpha Galaxy, which is going to be tedious, especially on these big guys. But I've done it before. I can do an even better job than what I did before nowadays. So I'm happy about that, in my mind anyway. But I do want these things to be representative of Smoke Jaguar in the Ill Clan era. They have just recently been re-established, and they're in the process of rebuilding, finding their identity again, proving themselves and all that. And I really like the concept of how they are now a lot in the Ill Clan era. But the big thing I want to know, and I haven't seen anything in the publications and stuff in the Ill Clan era that I own, I want to know what is their look that they're going with. Obviously, they're going to rebuild, so they're going to have more than one galaxy once they start getting their strength back up proper. So that's not I'm aware of that, but I'm just like, are they just gonna go right back with the schemes they've had? Are they gonna introduce anything new? That's what I'm curious about. And from what I've been told, and from what I've read on the internet in terms of people, and what I've been told directly in a comment, is that it is Alpha Galaxy that they're currently, that they're rebuilding. Or the Alpha Galaxy is one of the schemes that they are utilizing, more or less, put it to you that way. And I want this to be representative of Ilklan era as well. So that's why I'm really curious, because that's great. But if they have been confirmed as doing a whole different scheme or anything else, I would like to know what that is and potentially roll with that instead if we don't have actual confirmation that Alpha Galaxy is going to be the thing, which more than likely it will be, right? I'm going to do a video on it in case you're curious, but Paul Moon, who's credited with, Fidelis and Linda Fidelis, and actually got Alaric Ward to, you know, agree to having the Fidelis assist them, and then, once they become Ilklan, to restore Smoke Clan, Smoke Jaguar. In any case, Moon came from Delta Galaxy. So I'm wondering, could that be a viable concept as well? Because he's not the one in there at all. It's his offspring. She's the Khan. Would they go with Alpha Galaxy because it's Alpha Galaxy, and would they rebuild Alpha, Beta, Delta like that? Or would they start off with Delta Galaxy? Considering that's where Moon came from. I almost feel like, hey, Moon came from there. Why not go with that first? Could be a viable concept too. So that's why I'm just curious, trying to figure things out. Because, I'm one of those people who would really like to try and do things quote unquote properly. When I say quote unquote properly, I mean like in the lore. So if Delta Galaxy is it, I would do Delta Galaxy. In fact, I almost feel like Delta Galaxy is what they did, Delta Galaxy actually has a lot in common with MechWarrior 5 Clan's Alpha Galaxy. The only difference is they don't use spots, where Alpha Galaxy does in MechWarrior 5 Clans. But Delta Galaxy has the yellow accenting that they gave to Alpha. So, I'm sure they had their reasons. But in any case, it's just one of those things that has zero bearing on anything and ultimately doesn't matter. But I'm just one of those people where, not just for Battletech, but for anything, I like to try and keep it lore accurate when I'm representing something that's in the lore. And that's what I'm doing here. So I want to try and keep that accuracy going, if that makes any sense. So that's what floats around my brain when it comes to doing stuff like this for Battletech. Alrighty. It's crazy how different this looks with the paint on it. And it's not even fully done, right? It's not even fully committed or anything, but it just looks so different with just some basic coats of paint on it, or just some primer coat on it. I think it's because, when you're doing the mud and sanding it down for smoothness, you're going by feel, really, for feeling smooth. So you might see striations, but they're not actually there. However, because you can see it, your mind's kind of like, I don't know, But then when you recover that stuff in primer coat and it goes away, you're like, oh yeah, wow, that really is smooth. Look at that. So, at least that's the way I think it works, or my pea brain works, I should say. Um, so you get a real sense of accomplishment and progress really once the primer coat goes down. Which I'm a fan of. What's kind of funny to me is that if you really go back in the day from miniature making and model making stuff, even back when I was a kid and barely doing anything aside from doing some really bad looking jungle camo on the few pewter mechs that I had growing up as a kid that I would get with allowance money or for a gift or whatever, um, is I don't know if it's a cyclical nature to paints and stuff like that, but I remember, I mean, you always had acrylics, not like you didn't, but I remember growing up anyway, here in the States, obviously it's going to be different companies depending on where you are, I imagine. Uh, like, acrylics were okay, and you had them, but enamels were really popular for paint color. Maybe lacquer, I don't know, but I remember like tester enamels and I think Revel, was it Revel? Not Revel. One of them also has enamels. That is a name that I didn't, I haven't seen in a while until I went to like a hobby town. I mean, and they make the other company makes acrylics, and like Tamiya, like weird acrylic that we still have, and enamels. Like enamels are really popular, I guess. Then they kind of faded back and became like specialty things that we'll see in miniature wargaming stuff, like the stuff from AK and whatever else. And then acrylics really have been on the rise for years and years and constantly get better and better, and they do. Uh, but we still see companies that have been doing like Gaia knows isn't anything new. It's just hard to get a hold of in the States, especially now. Um, but they produce their lacquer paints, whatever else, and they're good paints. It's just more specialized, but there's still a place for all this stuff, which is kind of cool. And I'm wondering if, not that we'll get a reversal, but outside of miniature wargaming and some basic scale modeling stuff, people really delve into enamels and lacquers and stuff to do some pretty specific scale model things for color matching for like outclads for aircraft and whatever else, and car miniature models stuff, and even enamels. And while Gunpla people use everything, I've noticed, I've seen a lot of the things like Gaia Notes and Mr. Color and everything else. So I'm wondering if any of the quote-unquote older mediums of paint like enamels and lacquers will kind of find their way again into the scale model and miniature gaming side of things, because they have found their way in the past. Alcohol-based paints have weaseled their way in and kind of stay as a niche thing, probably more niche than the others. Not be it'll because the big companies don't really tackle it for miniature gaming, right? Vallejo, or Vallejo, I want to say it, is a paint company that I think is overrated. I'm gonna say it. Some of their colors are nice. I don't like their metallics. I don't see what people like in their metallics personally. But if you like it and it works, and I don't have to, right? If you like it and it works for you, great. I just don't particularly like them. I like some of their grays, like their super dark, like their black gray. It's really nice. And they have some other colors that work out nicely. Reaper are okay. Army Painter, again, they're okay. Um, I do like Citadel paints, and like I said, I like certain Vallejos, and I haven't really found. Army Painter has some interesting colors. There's other companies out there too, but like I don't know. Vallejo, anyway. The whole point of that tangent was that Vallejo is, I think, the only company that does um, of those bigger ones, if you will, that handles uh, things outside of acrylic. Really, like Citadel doesn't. To me, it does. To me, it has some interesting paints all around. But Vallejo has alcohol-based metallics, which are very, very nice. Um, those are the metallics I like, but their acrylics, not a big fan of their acrylic metallics. To be fair, when it comes to metallics, though, ever since discovering their liquid gold metal, the liquid metal range, liquid gold, liquid silver, liquid copper, and everything, not much has stood up in comparison for me. So that kind of ruined, in a good way, metallics for me, because now I don't. It's no question. I just go right for those metallics. So this is definitely going to take more paint than I keep putting on here, but I don't want to put too much on like I just did, because I don't want to waste it. I mean, I've rematriculated or reconstituted or whatever you want to call it, a lot of the paint that's been on there. So we're actually getting pretty good usage. We're not really wasting too much. Part of paint, no matter what you're doing, airbrush or otherwise, you're gonna have waste. Doesn't matter. It's gonna happen. You gotta just live with it. But doing pretty good in that department, all things considered here. I'm just trying to mitigate it as best I can. And I also want to be careful with not making it too thin, because then I'll have to add more Mr. Color or Mr. Surfacer. It is Mr. Color. It's Mr. Color Thinner. I think it's Mr. Color Surfacer. But, whatever. Well, I guess it's Mr. Hobby. Is the parent brand, if you will. So I don't know how thin that is. We'll figure it out by putting the old paint down. Not bad. It's gonna fall over. I'm wondering if I'm just gonna have to learn to live with the fact I'm not gonna get as opaque coverage the way I want to with the way, or not that I won't. I definitely can, especially with airbrushes. But the way I'm used to doing it with acrylics, I think I might have to just get used to the fact that I can't do it that way with these. I can do it, I just gotta do it a bit of a different way. With acrylics, you're so used to painting. I don't know about you, if you're whoever watches it ever, but I'm so used to painting and then not pulling, and kind of like quote unquote pulling off excess. So you put a blooper paint down. That's a technical term. Like here on top of here, and you constantly drag it back and forth until it's, fully coating it. And then like if it feels like there's excess, you kind of keep going to try and pull some of it off. When you do that with this Mr. Surfacer, it kind of like, because the thinner is also like a stripping agent in a way, you kind of just end up pulling the paint off that you just put on. So you got to kind of like not dabble it literally and not get it on your fingers because you're being silly and not knowing what you're doing. But you got to kind of just like put it on there and then just leave it. You not goop on a whole big heavy helping of goop, but just the right amount of goop, right? You got your goopage ratios got to be correct. It feels like with the paintbrush to get the opaque coverage I'm looking for, and then you let it fully dry, and then you're good. But I gotta get used to that because with acrylics, that would be something you didn't want to do at all. That'd be like a no-no. So, you know, things to consider, I suppose. The learning process. And I have seen stuff out there about how people use this, and they do kind of just like dab it on, if you will, stipple it on almost, and leave it alone. And I never really paid too much attention to that, mostly because it was never the priming process, it was something else that they were doing. And so, you know, I didn't really think too much about it. But now that I'm doing it myself, I'm like, oh, I can kind of see what they were doing back there. When I say back there, I mean in the videos I was watching. So, I like using different paints like this. They help broaden things. I'm not gonna say I'm a particularly good in the capability department painter, but in knowing how to use different mediums, I think it helps. So there's that. Who doesn't like that? These paintbrushes I'm rather liking. What's the word? Thunderbird. I got them off of Amazon. A pretty decent cost. It's miniature fine detail brushes from Golden Maple. If I could get this on the camera right. There we go. I think it was like 20 something bucks for like a package of like a bunch of brushes. Like all of these plus the one I'm using. And they're working pretty good. I can't really complain about them. And I feel like if you can't really complain about them, that's a good thing. Some people gotta be like, oh, it's the bestest thing since sliced bread. I'm gonna be honest with you. I never used super high quality, expensive brushes really, ever before. I'm not, and these aren't that. That's not what I'm saying. But when it comes to brushes, the different brushes I have used, I've never been a connoisseur, right? Like wine tasting. I can't tell you the tannins and stuff like that, like some people do, or at least claim to do. I can say it tastes good or it doesn't taste good to me, or whatever. Or yeah, that is particularly fruity, or that's particularly sour, or whatever. And so when it comes to brushes, I've used super cheapo brushes, and I've used not cheapo brushes, but not expensive brushes. You know what I mean? Like I haven't purchased a brush, like a singular brush was like 20 bucks or something like that, because I refuse. I'm like, there's no way it's that good that it warrants the price tag. Really, I don't care what anybody says, unless it paints the thing for me immaculately, and I just press a button and it does it while hovering and taking care of itself. It's not gonna be worth being expensive. It's a brush. I hate to say it like that, but I'm just like, it's a brush. Let's not pretend it's something it isn't. It's not like it's not like the brush has the soul of Van Gogh and it's going to do, produce quality work by itself or anything. Maybe it does. I don't know. But my point in all this old man rambling is that I feel like if you can't, I feel like not being able to complain is still not viewed as good enough of praise to, so people kind of hear, oh, so it's not that good because you're not, just because you can't complain, so you can't say anything good about it. It's like, no, it's a brush. It does what a brush does. I can't complain because it does what a brush does. So that's good. I don't know what more do you want from me. And these brushes feel pretty good. That's one of the things that I thought maybe, when I first got into miniature painting in earnest. Like I did stuff as a kid growing up, no rhyme or reason. But when I really got involved with miniature wargaming, through 40K proper, because that's when I really got involved with like painting stuff up. and trying to match things or whatever else. Um, I thought, okay, I looked up stuff, read things, saw videos at the time that were out at the time. It was a different place, the YouTubes back then. Um, I know because I was a part of it back then in 2000. Like, well, I wasn't a part of it back then, but I started in 2009 on a different channel, but which is still up, by the way. But anyways, I would watch and read things, and I was like, okay, maybe, I'm new. I'm still pretty new to painting, like, in a serious way like this. And serious is, in quotations, and trying to actually, like, match something. And, I was collecting Dark Angels, so, like, actually trying to paint up a Dark Angel scheme and do it well. That's what I call painting seriously. Wasn't just throwing paint on a model to go, oh, that looks cool. And that was before 2009. That was like years before 2009. But anyway, I would see things about brushes and choosing brushes and, natural hair versus synthetic and different companies and Sable and how people like swear by certain brands and curse others. And I was like, well, I don't really feel it now. Maybe it's because I'm new. And as I get better, I'll develop this knack and this feeling. And then I'll understand what's being said. And either I never got better, which is entirely plausible, or it's a little bit of mumbo jumbo because I haven't really noticed anything else. I'm assuming these are synthetic. I don't even know, nor do I really care because they work great so far, right? I have no idea. I'm assuming they are synthetic though. It doesn't matter though, because whatever they are, they work fine. And if it's not what people are saying always the bestest thing, maybe I just never got better or never got to a certain level of quality to be able to discern the difference in use. But that's just me, I suppose. So you can see in there, kind of, like the paint's all over the place, but I'm able to reconstitute. This would probably have been a bit more effective in a smaller bottom, but it's okay. These definitely clean easy, so that'll be good. While I have a bunch of them, I don't want to just leave paint on there. Technically you can kind of leave paint on there overnight and then put its thinner back down and make it usable for primer coat stuff, but I'm not looking to do that. I'm not saying I won't leave it probably overnight, more than likely. I'm just saying that I'm not looking to do that particular level of stuff. I gotta be careful. I keep grabbing stuff that isn't quite dry, thinking that it is because I forget where I put the paint, which happens when you get more gray over things and you can't tell where you haven't painted and you have painted. So that's good there. I think this is another balancing act of not quite enough paint to thinner that I've been putting down because I'm trying to use what's here. So I gotta be careful and do extra coats, which is okay. It's just I gotta be cognizant of that for how I handle painting and touching stuff. because this stuff actually becomes more of a nuisance to work with when it gets tackier. I mean, all paints kind of do, but sometimes with acrylics, like, oh, it'll just stick better. No, it actually sticks and goes where you want it better and stays there when it's wetter and not quite so tacky. And I feel like, at least with my bad painting capabilities, that's not how it works for like acrylic. I feel like acrylics want to stick better and do, follow the rules, if you will, a bit better for you when they get a little tackier. Not that you want to be tacky, but you know what I mean. I hope. I'm gonna try filing down this thing some more. No, I have different shaped ones. I don't know why I don't try to use them. That's not what I'm looking for. So don't quite know how that's different from the one I have currently out to use. Let's try this one. There we go. Out the box with you. Okay, so it's not on the edges, but it's a thinner shape. So that'll help me get here, and specifically here. I'm asking a lot of 10,000 grit, but it's working, so that's good. It's crazy in trying to handle stuff like this, more miniature style like this, or scale model / Gunpla style like this, than just straight up miniature painting style. You amass a lot more kind of specialty tools like that file set. And the truth is, I probably need more than just that 10,000. Obviously, I do. I need some other sanding sticks of different grit. So if you truly want to do like, I call it studio quality, pro quality, studio quality stuff when it comes to miniatures and models, and filling in all the gaps that aren't needed and smoothing everything out. You can get away with certain things being done with like a mold line scraper and a hobby knife and whatever else, and having that ultimately work out for you. But you're still going to amass a lot of tools and a lot of things you're going to have to repurchase because it's going to run out, like sanding film. Out of sheer curiosity, I'm going to damp it down on some of these flock material just to see what happens, because I don't know what happens. But I'm really impressed with the coverage on this basic Shadowcat here. Or when I say basic, I'm referring to the scale, the standard size Shadowcat scale that this is. I'm actually rather impressed with it. So that's cool. I wasn't expecting to be disappointed. It's exceeding my thoughts of what I would think a basic primer thing would do, for never having used it before. Any more? Take a little break. Breathe a little bit. Let things kind of dry, then reconstitute on the little palette thing there, and on the whatever else. And Bob's your uncle, as they say. It's funny. I really am liking this Mr. Surfacer stuff as I let things dry a bit more before putting a second coat down and maneuvering it around, so I can touch things and not be too worried. It dries quick. I don't want to mess things up. Plus, I want to take a little break. I'm liking it as my primer, but it's the funniest thing is, like, you look at it, there's nothing. It's not like it's glowing, or you know, if I was using a gray primer from, let's say, Vallejo's, like, gray primer stuff or whatever else, or just a gray base, you know, base color from GW or whatever, provided it was the same hue of gray or whatever, it wouldn't look any different. Like, it looks just like a gray primer. Like, you wouldn't say, oh yeah, I can tell you used Mr. Surfacer or whatever. You can't. But it just works better. It's one of those weird things where it just feels better, so that's cool, but you don't really think too much about it, right? So that's white. We don't want that. That's a neutral gray. Oh, I'm gonna have to figure out what gray I want by taking the time to mix these colors up. So I was looking at my Gaia Notes paints here. I have a lot of different grays with white. This is a warm light gray. And I can't tell much. This is neutral gray 4. This is neutral gray 2. This is German gray. The other Germans make good stuff. And then I have... this is just gloss. This is neutral gray 1. This is flat black. Ultimate white. And then I have a steel white. Now I gotta mix them, and then maybe make a swatch, a swath. I don't know why I said swatch. I think it's a swatch. I think, just to see what they look like. Because I'm going for the Alpha Galaxy, like I said, and I'm going for definitely a lighter, more neutral gray for the base. I wouldn't call it a near white, but approaching that almost. But still very much gray, so it's like I don't want it to look like it's white with gray spots or rosettes on it. I want it to look like it's gray with slightly darker gray rosettes on it. So I want to find a gray that isn't too dark of a gray to start with, and then I want to try and either have to mix together or whatever a gray that is dark enough to be noticeable but not super dark. Like personally like having super obvious dark rosettes on a light gray on a lighter color. So I got to figure that out. I guess is what I'm saying here. Boo 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 boo. Alrighty. What was I looking for? I thought I was gonna look for something. Oh no, I did. I was looking at the guy nose paints. Jeez. What's wrong with me? The things are definitely looking pretty good. I think my goal now is to try to get the rest of the mud sections covered in a decent coat of gray, and then see what I want to do from there. Well, also, since I'm here, I might as well test this out. A little bit of sanding on top here, see what happens. Nothing really. I'll put another little light coat of the gray up there just to re-hit it. I just want to make sure I don't have any like lines. Very nice though. Very, very nice. Oy. How does this work? I wonder. Oh, good. Hmm. What my phone going crazy for now? Hmm. How strange. Be very, very quiet. I gotta reset this. Hold up. Yeah, I did it. All right. I don't think I need that mixer right now. Let's do this. A little bit of Mr. Thinner. Mr. Color Thinner, I guess to be exact, from Mr. Hobby. I feel like the thinner, aside from obviously it makes it thinner, I think it keeps it wetter longer. I don't know, it feels that way. So let's reconstitute some stuff. Let's work on getting things coated that aren't coated yet in this primer. Here we go. Who doesn't like a bit of primer? Freeborns, that's who. Rude. Absolutely rude. Why would you even say such a thing? Alrighty. I think I'm feeling a bit better acclimated to using this paint, which 100% will be better off in an airbrush. I think doing primer coats in general are just better off that way, but it's not always an option. Some people don't have it. I have it, I just didn't want to do it. So, you know, there's that. And for others, as I said before, sometimes it's not up to them, right? Maybe they're solving at home, in school, like high school, whatever, or you're living in a dorm most of the year. Not exactly something you're going to be able to do in the dorm. Now, of course, you don't have to follow the rules. I'm not saying, you know, that's up to you. I'm just saying, in general, typically, it becomes easier to do things without having to worry about if you're quote-unquote following the rules once you're more settled down and in a stabler place. Temporary housing situation for school or anything else may not be too conducive to get an airbrush. So here we are doing it by hand, and guess what? It works just fine. Now there are some paints, like I said before, that don't really work by hand, like Alclads. But, you know, they're not necessarily needed in that situation anyway. Like, obviously, if you can't, you do, if it's not a paint that works really well at all with a paintbrush, then you're not going to use that paint. And the good news is, you're never going to really find yourself in a position where you really need that paint anyway. Majority of painting is going to be done for people with acrylics unless they're getting really into a particular medium or want to try stuff out, or, you know, you're really into your Gunpla scale models or anything else and you decide you want to use a different medium because you just like what you've seen about the paints, or you know it's got better coverage or whatever. So it all depends on what you're doing. This coverage is really nice. I'm not trying to overstate things. You know, it's so easy to hear, oh, bestest thing ever. Well, that's nice, but, you know, is it really? And that's not what I'm saying here. It's just really, it is really nice, though, to use it. I do like it. So these legs will eventually be locked in position. One of the things I could have probably done, and maybe I'll do it once everything's dry, is I'll have it stand. I'll put the torso on it carefully again, and just to have it stand in a position where how I like it, and then lock the legs in that way with some glue, just for sturdy sake. The big question that's going to pop in way later is, what the heck am I going to do to affix it to a base? I don't have a base yet. I could either A, use a CAD program to design a hex base of appropriate size, which I think is going to be like 9 inches or 8 by 9 inches or something like that. B, I didn't see any at Hobby Lobby. See if I can't find hexagonal or hexagon wood pieces. I know I can find them on Amazon. Use that instead. Or C, figure out a whole other way. I might go with the wood. I feel like if I do that, it'll be a sturdier base. I can put... I don't know why, I just feel like wood would be sturdier. I feel like I could probably find something that isn't just flat, but it's kind of like hollow, where I can either build up an interesting layer for it, or turn around and use a hollowness to further weigh it down. I don't know. I just feel like I might want to go that route just to be easier. And then I got to figure out how I want to affix the model to the base. With this, is going to be a little problematic. I can potentially gauge up where the center is, and once the legs are glued, I could probably drill into the center a bit deeper into it, because it'll go into that like ankle support area and not just drill through the foot, because I don't want to drill through the foot. And I could use that to do a kind of a long like rod pin to the base. So basically like drill somewhere in the center here, central mass here, to kind of get into this little piece. And then maybe do some minor drilling into the toes and have like a 4 per foot pin situation that it can be glued onto. I just grabbed it where I painted it, not thinking. Go me. And I think that could potentially help lock it in place. Which would really make it secure. And then I could see, you know, and then use glue. I'm thinking either hot glue, which isn't super, super strong, but easy enough to do on the dowels and stuff to push down onto the base, or I can do 2-part epoxy that can be really strong. The thing is, I kind of want to get it standing on the base before doing modeling like sand and stuff around it, because I don't want it to stand on top. Like if you glue them, I don't have a good example. So like this Battlemaster base, if it comes in clear at all. Where are you? What the heck is going on here? So this guy, is that good? I can't tell from this angle, but his base, the way he's on it, I had to put the basing material around him, and what the end result of that is that it looks a lot more in like the mech is standing properly on the surface and not above the dirt and whatnot. Like the feet feel like they kind of stepped in a little bit, which is a really handy thing. So that is more or less the effect I want to go for on something big like this. I just want it to be, you know, supporting of the model and still be able to do a kind of a decent basing job around it. I gotta figure out what that even means, because I gotta figure out how I want to display these things. My first thought was like a display board, but do I want to put them in line and have it be a long board? Do I want to be more square so you have some mechs standing in front of each other? My problem with standing in front of each other is then you get some blockage happening. So I don't know exactly what I want to do. I'm more leaning on the line, or at the very least a quasi line. I don't know if I want to make the base too tall. Like, for example, I don't know if I want this shadow cat here to be on like a hill or something elevated, and standing on top of that, like taking watch in the back or towards the front, and then something standing, like if it's in the back, then something standing in front of that hill, but lower. I don't know. I don't know how I want to handle something like that. I do plan to, whatever I do for basing, weigh down the bottom of this base even more. So hopefully it's a durable base, whatever I decided to do. And then I want to weigh it down some more for sure to kind of make it more stable. So if I do want to put them, well, I just want them to be stable, period, because they're going to probably be stored on a shelf somewhere in their display, looking cool. I don't want them to just topple over because there was a vibration or something. So a weighted base will help with that, because these things are pretty light as it is. So I think a wooden base will naturally help that. And then putting material on it, and then if it's capable of being maybe drilled into or doing whatever, fixing weights in some capacity of just random stuff to the bottom of it can help. In terms of I don't know why I painted that. This was an autopilot and saw mud, so I painted it. That'll help it just be stable. So I definitely want to do that, and then maybe I can consider adding some height to a display. So there are 4 other mechs than this, obviously. It's a star. I don't know if I want to... Did I break that? No. Yes, I did. That explains why I can't suck up any thinner. The pipette broke on its seam. Well, it's still working, so we'll roll with it. Barely, but I don't need a lot of stuff, so it kind of works. Capillary action-wise, it works, I suppose. I have a bunch more. I just don't want to do that. So yeah, I could add some height to the to a display concept. But yeah, this is the first of 5 mechs since it's a star, and it's also the lightest and therefore the smallest of the mechs. So that's why I started with it first. I'm going to be going in weight order. I guess as a quasi hint for anybody who watches this. In terms of printing and putting things together and whatnot. So, you know, I'll end, of course, with the heaviest in the star. But being the lightest and the smallest, I can put it in a variety of places and it can still make sense. I could put it in a hill in the background, like it's scouted, everything pulled up and it's getting ready to go. It does have a Gauss rifle, so it could be up on the hill getting ready to snipe something directly, you know? There's different things I can do. Thematically, though, it makes sense for a Shadowcat. It has jump jets, but I'm not doing a jumping motion with this. That would involve a lot of extra work that I'm just not going to do, and a lot more fiddliness to a base and everything else. So that will not be happening. But I do feel like that could be fun, but I'm not doing it. I could have this thing out in front, being small. I could then do a smaller hill behind it for something to stand on and not really be obscured at all. Presuming, of course, I haven't printed out the other mechs yet. So if everything is truly 1/60th scale or 28mm scale, then things should be standing bigger than this guy, which is already kind of big. But considering that classic Timberwolf was 1/60th scale, and it is, I do feel stands taller than this Shadowcat, whatever, then everything should be fine. It's not part of this star. I'm just saying, for example, I do have another 1/60th scale thing. That was more of a proof of concept and tests and everything else. Plus, I really like the classic look, so I wanted one. None of these other mechs are doing their classic look, so the more modern MWO style looks. So as much as I like the classic Timberwolf, it just won't fit in. So there's that. But that's okay. These bipeds are awful that I purchased. Their seam is finicky and prone to breaking really easily. They both did it. Luckily, it doesn't matter for what I'm doing here, but it could easily matter. Now I'm using a lot of Mr. Surfacer. I don't think I'm using like so much more than if I was doing the airbrush method, but you know, to put into perspective, the Shadowcat is basically primed. The 6mm Shadowcat, the standard size Shadowcat, is basically primed, right? I see one other area where I could clean it up a little nicer, though you really don't notice it, so I might not. But he's basically primed, ready to go. So I don't need any of this, you know. So very, very little actually to prime a standard size mech. This is a 1/60th scale beast, so it's a bit more to it, a bit more involved than just than something like your standard size force pack stuff. So you got to keep that in mind. Yes, I keep using a lot, but look at how big the body. Like, this is huge. This is like painting up a full star and then some of mechs on the standard BattleTech, you know, classic BattleTech scale. Probably like 2 stars worth of mechs or something. Like, it's a lot to paint in terms of surface area, and therefore requires a lot of everything. So there is that. Let's not forget that. I'm not just being bad. I mean, that's part of it, I'm sure. But there's a lot to cover here. A lot to coat. And even though it really is no, I mean, it is different what we're doing, but the process, you know, ultimately what we're doing anyway. But the process was just the same as when I was doing the mud, right? Painting it on, getting it coverage. I just don't have to sand it and then reapply to try to get smoother and smoother because that's basically done. Um, but the basic process of get the stuff, apply it to the model, like paint. In this case, it is paint, and rinse and repeat. So it's the same basic principle. However, in doing it as actual paint as opposed to a mud thing, gotta get some of this stuff reconstituted and put down. It just feels like so much more progress is being made when you see the stuff being, you know, becoming gray and being a nice smooth gray than when you're just doing the mud. It just feels like so much more progress, even though it's basically I'm doing the exact same thing just with a different color and it's actually paint this time. It's so much more progress feel, which is a great thing for your psyche when you're doing hobby stuff like this, because when you get lost in the sauce of mud, not literally the other context, but when you are doing the process, the mud process before this, and you're really taking the time to get everything situated, you can feel a little not so much hopeless or helpless, but you can feel a little bit burnt isn't even the word either, because I wasn't burnt out, but you just kind of feel like questioning of, are you really making any progress, even though you are? And then you start to see the progress and feel it, and you go, yeah, I'm making progress, it's just hard to see. And then with this primer coat, it's like, oh yeah, boom, progress is made. What was this mud color is now gray, ready for more painting. And it's like, yeah, wow, that's cool. That's actual progress being made. No ifs, ands, or buts, no questions asked. And it feels good. It's a nice little boost to what you're doing. So if you are going to do that mud, consider that concept and keep that in mind, and you should be doing pretty well yourself. So that's always good. What am I looking for? Let's see here. What am I looking for? I'll be back. All right. So, a bit more of the color, a bit more of the thinner. try and bring down some of that stuff and reconstitute it properly. That might be a bit too much. I wasn't quite sure how much went in there because of the broken pipette. Let's see. Yeah, it does more or less reconstitute itself to a decent amount. It is still more or less drying down here, but it wasn't really enough pigment for my liking, so we can kind of just slam it on in certain areas because this is, I'm not going to say less important, but it's going to be less seen consistently. So I guess I feel more okay with being a little bit more quote-unquote reckless, which really doesn't hurt on this stuff. It doesn't really go on quote-unquote thick, so I'm not too worried. Like, I can still see details that I'm, even though when I'm putting it on, what I would consider to be quote-unquote thick, by acrylic terms. Well, I don't even know if that makes sense. It just doesn't behave the same. Which makes perfect sense because it's not the same. So, I'm getting used to it, but I am liking it. I am definitely liking this priming capability. Now, I have a Space Marine that I gotta continue painting. I don't think I'd use this on the Space Marine. And the only reason I say that is I have a process for doing the effect on my DIY chapter that's orange, and part of that process involves basically basing the model, not using gray, right? Now, to be fair, with the way this goes on and how thin it goes on and does good coverage, this would probably be pretty good for another model after this one. And if I had a black Mista Surfacer, I would definitely consider that for a base coat for doing like metallic, like or doing what I call not just what I call, but what's being called Tisca Ruby for Pre-Heresy 1000 Suns, where you put gold down and you do a full gold paint job, and then you tint it basically. That would work very nicely, I think, with a black Mr. Color surfacer. I think. I don't know. It feels like it would work out very nicely with you that way. So, there we go. Let's reconstitute some of that. Looking at the Shadowcat standard size Shadowcat. Hit some of that, why not? Doesn't really matter, because I will be hitting that with brown. All right. I really feel like that standard size Shadowcat is ready for the next stage. So we will keep them there. But yeah, so anyway, for that Space Marine thing, I just feel like because I do a beigeish thing, I don't think I need it. But for doing Tisca Ruby, I feel like a black Mr. Surfacer would be great for doing gold over, especially because I do. I typically have been doing alcohol-based paint for gold, Vallejo's liquid color, but Alclad 2, a lacquer base, I have a gold for that looks really nice that I haven't really been able to play around with yet. But I also have its base black, its black base coating, so I would just use that in that process, I suppose. I guess that all depends on how the gold comes out. I also have a copper for Alclad 2, and I think my thought there is to base it in like do the black, then do a full coat of copper, and then do like a heavy like Xenothol-ish airbrush of gold over everything, keeping the copper in the recesses the best I can, or in the bottom areas and like underneath areas, and then use that instead of doing a wash and then a dry brush or whatever of gold over, which you can't do with the Alclad stuff. So we'll see. At the end of the day, this paint isn't as quote unquote convenient as acrylics, right? There's more you gotta do with it in terms of, you have to have a special thinner. You should wear a mask. And while it has its advantages, I mean, so does acrylics. I'm not saying one is superior to the other. It's not the most convenient of the two paints, but it definitely gets a good result. So you kind of have to weigh it out that way, I suppose, and think about it like that. But, that's how it works for anything. Alrighty. So I'm going to let this fully dry on the bottom here. Then I can hit the sides and then come back into the top once more, and I think we'll be good on that. The arms are looking pretty good, all things considered. I don't know why I said all things considered. The arms are just looking pretty good. I think a little bit of coverage, a little bit extra on this guy will be pretty good. And then I think the Gauss rifle arm is more or less Let's see. Something feels a bit weird here. Could be a weird sanding line that I did. Strange. Okay. A little bit of touch up on the arms and we'll be good there. So we're making progress. It's the legs that are some of the harder things to do. I knew that was going to be the case in putting them together like this. But I feel it important. Oops. It's kind of hard to do a proper mixture when your pipettes are broken and for some reason you just refuse to replace them with the other like 100 that you have. Don't ask, I don't know. Right. Let's get in here and get these feet taken care of. I think what I should do with the legs is prioritize specific areas. So like here, if I can get the feet looking good for base coat purposes, then I can move on eventually to the shin leg area and up and up and up without real worry. The hardest part is getting it on this damn camera. I don't know what happened with the... Again, I already am not following what I just said I was going to do. That's how you know you got problems. Now, I'm not caring about getting the absolute bottom of the feet, just the ridge that's right above the absolute bottom. So that's what I'm doing. I think I got to get a longer cable for the camera that I'm using here and maybe reposition it in a way to get it more or less where I want it to be, to make it easier on myself for painting here. But, you know, food for thought. So while the Shadowcat is the smallest mech in my Mega project, and that's why I'm doing the standard size Shadowcat alongside of it, it's not the smallest mech that I have for wanting to paint up in this Alpha Galaxy configuration. That would actually be a Fire Moth Prime that I have, which I tracked down that force pack specifically because it has a Fire Moth Prime. I didn't get the Alpha Strike pack or the Alpha Strike box set, starter set, because even though it has a Fire Moth in there, because I felt like that was a lot. And while I know exactly what I want to do for my client stuff, it's like, do I do like that Battlemaster I painted up in Aerodani Lighthorse / Starly colors, which was more or less my plan for any inner sphere. So I kind of have the plan, but it's like, do I really want to for that? I think so. It's a variously different scheme, but I don't know. Right now I'm not looking to paint up non-clan stuff, and I'm not looking to amass a big pile of shame like I have for 40k things that I desperately need to get rid of. As I condense that down. So I just didn't want to have a lot of that hanging around or hanging over my head. Should that still be available once I get things more or less caught up on the Battletech side? I think I shall pick up the Alpha Strike box set. Even though personally I have never done Alpha Strike. I've only ever done Classic Battletech, and that was well over a decade ago. Just because of time constraints and lack of knowing people. I think it'd be fun to have the rule set. And, you know, the mechs are always cool. And I really think they made a really good call in having it be the same scale. They could have easily done something weird with the scaling. But because the mechs perform double duty, whatever you have could easily be part of something else. And that's really, really cool. But I just want to get Fire Moths. I don't know why. I'm also seriously considering an Urban Mech Lance just to have 4 Urbies. Paint them up. Put them out there. Have people go, but why? Right? It's the mascot after all, and I feel like you got to do the mascot proud, as I'm not on camera. So, that's my quote-unquote justification. Not that I think you need much justification for the Evermech. People get it. If they don't, they get it in short order, right? Before MechWare Online, back in the 2000s, there was, I think, Battletech 325, or is it MechWare 325? I think it was Battletech 325. That got canceled. It was from EA, and it got canceled. Not really sure why, because while I was beta testing it, you know, I just wasn't really looking up stuff like that. I was just more having fun beta testing it, and I wasn't looking at metrics and I don't think things were kind of, you know, I just wasn't in that wheelhouse to kind of really dive into the whys behind things. So I don't really know. I'm assuming some form of metrics, but it got canceled. But I was beta testing it. It was purely online. It was basically like, it was a different, it was, you know, 3025. So the thought process was eventually if it caught on and actually came out and had like expansions and stuff for itself, we would get to the, you know, 3050s. But you pledged different houses, I believe, or there was a star map they go and participate in certain battles in. Um, it was basically MechWarrior Online before MechWarrior Online, but just done differently. And it was a lot of fun. But I remember in that I was part of a lance, and I was in an urban mech. I chose it. I think I just chose it because I was like, why not? And I was the last of the party. Instead of, sticking with me, they just blitzed ahead and were outnumbered. And they took out some enemies. The enemies were taking them out. I got to fire and support. I wasn't just solo. But I remember it came down to me and an enemy panther. And I lost my autocannon 10. And the enemy panther, I think, had both of his weapons. Or lost, or was just down to S round. I don't remember exactly. What I do remember is having a weird duel off as an urban mech. And I had to, I was maneuvering and doing whatever else. And I guess instead of doing both feet, I'm just doing one whole leg side. That's what I'm deciding subconsciously. But I remember having to... it was the slowest, most painful duel in existence, I think. But I ended up winning with the urban mech against the panther. All I had was my small laser, but the panther was hurt too. It wasn't like it was a fresh panther or anything. And we're both on our last legs. Not literally with leg damage. Thankfully, I was slow enough. But I had my jump jets, and I kept jump jetting to kind of throw off the aim. And I just kept plinking away with the small laser, and it worked out. Over time, I eventually wore him down. He was already pretty damaged. And I won the match in an urban mech. And so for me, that's, that kind of solidified the urban mech's mystique and legend as being the most ultimate mech ever. I can't tell you why I chose an urban mech. I just did. And, mistakes were made, but it worked out at the end, I suppose. It wasn't like it was a capture mission or anything. It was just straight up destroy each other. And instead of, I get it, I'm slow and a liability. But if we maneuver as one, my autocannon 10 would definitely have been of good support earlier on. And I could have kept it because there would have been more people alive when I finally got to the battle. So I wouldn't have been targeted quite so quickly. Potentially. Right? And we could have really, laid support fire down. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. But it worked out. It was just painfully slow. I kind of feel like, I fought with all I could, but I was under the feeling that I'm not winning this. That was kind of my takeaway. But I'm like, I'll try. And I ended up winning it. Which was kind of fun. And then one day, just as couldn't log in anymore, not a lot was said. It was just canceled, and I didn't really read into why. I was like, well, that sucks, and moved on. But that was a fun game for its time. So these leg joints and the like are kind of problematic. I knew they would be. To paint, I'm gonna have to, once everything's dry, and I'll do this off camera. I'll get the leg to body stance more or less how I want it to be. And lock in the legs. That way I know that's how they're gonna stay, and I don't have any surprises in regards to, oh look, more mud's showing through. than I thought would, because it moved or whatever. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Alright, let's get these arms finished off so I can at least say part of the mech is finished in the base coat or the primer coat. Get in the recess. I gotta make sure all the finger joints and stuff are, the recesses are covered. I'm not looking for perfection here in the hand. I just want to get it covered enough so I do eventually just put like black down there in the form of like a black ink or a black wash, just to kind of keep it dark and not noticeable. It helped, you know, the effect is sold by the fact that it isn't mud colored in there, so that's why I'm particularly focusing on it right now. And a little hand crack. That might have been a bit much. I always say that, but I end up burning through it because this is a thirsty mech when it comes to a primer coat. Hardest part is getting the thinner out and not putting too much down when you don't have a working pipette. I think this gun arm is pretty rich, ready to go. I'm giving it a close-up inspection while it's not. That's why it's not on the camera or in the camera frame or whatever. I just want to make sure I can stop putting paint on it in terms of getting the mud covered up. Let's hope so anyway. I feel like it. We'll go with that and see what happens here. As I deliberately put more thinner in a particular area of that. That was a lot of thinner. That wasn't that's more than I wanted to put in. I would say that. But it is reconstituting what's up here to bring it down. This is a little hard on this brush. Not ideally what you want to do with a brush like this is what I'm doing, but I'm doing it because I'm not smart. I'll cover up things again. This is rather thin. I just really want to make sure anything that's going to be seen, at the very least, has this primer coat on it. And I'm going to go over it again, of course, with actual color. I mean, it is a color, it's a gray coat, but I just don't want any of the mud to show through. Once it's dry, I'll also be spinning this around to make sure it can still turn. The paint shouldn't stop that, but you never know. Alright, I'll get this side of the body done. And just this side and let it fully dry. That way I don't have to worry about accidentally touching it and making a problem. Because you don't want to do that. Gotta get inside here really well. So, that's fun. I don't need to get, I gotta remind myself, and this is a good thing to remind yourself when you're doing stuff like this. Like inside this socket here, not needed to paint. You won't ever see it. Sometimes I'll go to paint and I'll start painting inside of it and I'll catch myself and stop. It's like, no, I don't need that. Don't waste your time. Because you literally are never going to see it. The arms will be glued into that. So, if there ever was an actual waste in terms of your material and your time and stuff, is doing stuff like that. Now, around the socket and stuff, I'll do in order to basically have it so you won't see anything, right? You want to get everything base coated for potential sight. But stuff I know you're never going to see, I need to remind myself to stop just putting paint everywhere and paint specifically where you're going to see it. Because also, it helps with glue, right? Gluing and securing stuff becomes a bit problematic when paint's in there at times, depending upon the glue you're using. So, you want to really do what you can to make the adhesion surfaces, I suppose, work for you and not against you. Get ready for far too much thinner. I use it to get this caked on paint reconstituted, and I can use it. And so even though all I do is add thinner, it should not be super thin to the point where it's not going to provide good coverage, because I am getting the pigment back in there to a degree. So that's good. Reduce, reuse, recycle, and whatnot. Just got to be careful. You don't want it to be too much thinner when you apply the paint to the model, because then you might start reconstituting what's on the model. So it's a balancing act, but it's working in my favor. So we take those W's where we can. just gotta remember to try and really just focus on the size and not get too caught up and paint up all around. You know, try to follow my plan. Because if I try to follow my own plan, maybe, just maybe, I'll make the progress. Alright. It's all about making the progress. So I mentioned how the fire moth is the smallest thing I got. I want to do a painting video on the fire moth, not on a stream, but just like, you know, paint it over a series of however long it's going to take me, record it all, do a voiceover type, you know, the typical video stuff for it. That includes the base. And it's going to be Alpha Galaxy, so that's going to be interesting. I gotta really see how my camera's doing though. And I'm already not paying attention because I'm going to the other side of the model as opposed to really focusing on this one side. But I really hope, I gotta double check and look at some stuff that I recorded, you know, recently to make sure the camera's up to the task. Because I don't want to do it, especially because it's such a small mech, and have it just kind of look meh. You know what I mean? You don't want that meh going on. So I don't have a 1/60th scale fire moth. I don't think people have really done that. I'll just wipe that off by hand and start anew. I'm all for one. I just don't think I've ever seen one. It would have to be one that I approve of personally. Not like you don't need my approval to have one, but I don't just do a mech because it exists. I gotta like the way it looks for me. So if I came across one, I'd consider it. Why not? It's a fire moth. Fire moths are cool. Weird, but cool. And it's something I'll say in there, but you definitely don't want to just skip over your light mechs and whatnot. If you have a bunch of mechs that you got from like a box set or whatever the case is, yeah, most people aren't going to skip over a direwolf or a warhawk or a timberwolf to, you know, to do a fire moth, but you owe it to the fire moth to do it. It's kind of like warm-up practice. It can be a tougher thing to do because of its size, but you'll figure it out. But if you're doing a scheme, you'll get a better feel of the scheme, and then you'll have a mech done. And by the time you do the really cool shiny type of stuff that you really like, you're gonna feel really confident because you have been through it on smaller mechs. At least that's what I tell myself is how it works. But definitely consider that for yourself. Don't. Plus, light mechs are cool too. And gaming wise, depending upon the light mech and your strategy and everything, it can be an absolute menace to society. So there's that. And who doesn't love a good menace to society? I know I do. So honestly, with just using a little bit of thinner, I cleaned out this dish decently well and made use of it. It wasn't like I just cleaned the dish and it went to waste. It's not perfectly clean, but it's way better. It's a lot less waste than you might think when you first saw it or you first start working with it. And I don't know how this is gonna work, but I'm gonna try it out anyway for the research. particularly trying to constitute the sides back down into the center. This is obviously way thinner than the actual paint is, and not the best thing to use, like at this thickness. But I figure I got a lot more thinner than I do paint, and it doesn't take much. So I want to see what I can do in terms of now if I was going to do another massive painting sesh like the next day, you could kind of just get it all rematriculated down and then leave it, and then put some paint and some thinner in here and kind of reconstitute everything in the center. That much I do know, but I don't see myself doing that. I think tomorrow, should I stream, I'll be doing Mercenaries, because September is going to approach faster than we know, and while you can just, load up the DLC directly and load in that way with starter mechs and everything, I think it'd be really fun to have the save file prepped and ready to go that I'm working on right now on stream. So there's that. For the purpose of just sheer curiosity, I will try to make use of this a little bit, but it's far too thin. It's mostly thinner, which is why I picked something that didn't have any paint on it at all, because I didn't want to potentially rip it all off. I don't know how long that'll last, but my brush is also decently clean too. I have to clean into where the ferrule is. I think next time I'll use an older brush, or a thicker brush and stuff. Basically, I'll use. Maybe I'll use. No, that'll probably soak up too much stuff. I want to use a brush, or maybe even just like I don't know, maybe like a stick or something to mix it all together. But a brush would work the best. So maybe there's an old gnarly brush, mix it all together, not really care too much, and go from there. And mix the stuff, but that's neither here nor there. Really good progress. We have the Shadowcat itself primed up, the 6mm one, the standard size one, all primed up. I mean, look at the massive size difference here. Let me take something I can touch. I mean, look at that. Just side by side. That's just one gun, and it's more probably like base coating 2 to 3 Shadowcat miniatures. So, in terms of how this actually works, and in regards to, oh hey, there's more paint in there. Might as well use that. How this works in regards to the actual standard size models or miniatures, I wouldn't have had to use nearly as much paint here, and I would have gotten a fine result. So in terms of mission accomplished for basing the mech, probably could have based an entire star at this point. So there's that to consider, but that's to be expected with bigger scale stuff. You just got to keep that in mind. So, and I'm saying this not just for anybody who might watch this later on, since nobody's here now, but also for myself, to remind myself, I'm not using too much paint necessarily. This is a 1/60th scale mech, not a 6 to 8mm scale mech. There's going to be a pretty big difference in the amount of paint needed for coverage. So that's also, definitely a worthwhile consideration for when you're thinking about, efficiency with your paint and economics and whatnot. This may appear less economical because, well, I'm doing a gigantic mech with it. But it would have been the same for acrylics, so neither here nor there. But I'm really pleased with the result of how these paints cover, or this paint covers, Mr. Color. And it is, it is not as convenient as acrylics, but it definitely, with relatively little extra steps needed, provides great coverage. And I could definitely see this working out well on models in more intricate detail. Not that these don't have detail, but if you think about a Custodes or a Stormcast or something, a Astartes, things of that nature, more flowy bits and not just straight armor, it could work really nicely. So that's cool. I like that. Cleanup is also going to be pretty easy. You don't need to use the thinner for cleanup. You could use turpentine if you wanted to. Not turpentine. Lacquer thinner if you wanted to clean up. I don't think we'll need to go that kind of hardcore with it. Not that that's really hardcore, but stuff like that you really want to wear a mask for, and etc. I don't think we'll need to go that crazy for cleanup here. I think given the size and state of things, and we're not worried about like an airbrush right now for cleanup, we won't need that. So I can just more or less probably use, I'm going to try isopropyl alcohol on the brush and stuff first. Let's see how that goes. Because, I have that stuff in abundance. It's easy to get, it's cheap, and I'm not looking to use it for painting. I'm looking to use it for cleanup. So my hope is that it'll function okay for that. So here I go, painting up more of the mech than I thought I would. And I really didn't have to, I'm just cleaning up this, the pipette that I'm going to throw out because it's broken anyway, and there's disposable pipettes. And, got some more coverage out of that, which is really cool. Now, it's not perfect coverage. You're going to need to do the whole too thin coat rule here because it's not an airbrush or anything, but it's working, and that's what's important. It's not going to waste, and it's making progress. It's not like a fool's errand type of deal. I'm actually making decent progress here. The magic is starting to happen in terms of it really starting to come together. The moment you start covering up the mud is the moment the thing starts to look more and more like, even though it hasn't changed its shape, it just looks more and more like what you were going for in your mind's eye and what you're trying to achieve. And so the magic starts to happen where it starts to transform despite staying exactly the same shape, right? Which is a fun part of model making. That's the fun stuff. So we're getting there. I'm thinking once everything's fully primed, I'll focus on kind of quote unquote finishing up the paint of the legs. I'll get the base color. Well, basically, I'll get the base color of the gray down because no matter what, top or bottom, it's the same base neutral gray tone for the armor itself. It's just the top portion that gets the jaguar spots. So I could probably then do everything again, and then after doing all that, focus on just getting the legs completed, getting all the detail color bits, and then sealing it and doing the oil wash and everything else, and sealing it, and then sealing it again, and then maybe putting down decals if I can get a hand on some and find space to put them on the legs, and then seal that again and have the bottom fully done and ready to be put on a base. And then that'll let me focus on the sheer tedium and really focus on trusting the process of doing the spots, the rosettes on the upper half, because that's going to be a process on something this big. Obviously on the Shadow Cat, what I can do is I can do the same gray and everything, and when I'm finishing up the detail pieces on the leg, I can use some of those colors to do the detail pieces on the Shadow Cat overall. And you know, ipso facto, Bob's your uncle type of deal. I'm going to get the fire moth ready because I gotta do that too. So, and also I have here a clan elemental that I'm gonna want to, you know, clean up the base a little bit and base coat as well. So I think next stream, next C3 stream, will be an interesting one because I want to finish up basing or priming the 160 scale Shadow Cat. I want to, while doing that, prime this guy, and then the elemental, and then I want to get that fire moth out, and before doing the next stream, C3 stream, I want to get the fire moth out and get it going for its video series. And if I'm going to work on it on stream, it's going to be a weird one for anybody that shows up, if anybody ever does, because I'll be filming portions of what I'm doing with another camera, specifically for the fire moth and getting stuff out of the way. So it'll be an interesting kind of behind the scenes production, if you will, while doing stream production stuff. So that'll happen at some point, I'm sure. Whether it's next stream or not remains a mystery. And maybe even for a little bit of a break, doing a Space Marine, getting this orange going. I might just get the orange going tomorrow, just for, you know, on my own. Maybe watch a movie or something while doing it, relax, and enjoy myself. I mean, I enjoy myself doing this, but just relax and not have to worry about quips to nobody. So, yeah, I don't know when the next C3 stream will be outside for next weekend. We'll see. I mean, look at this. This is, I mean, it's not done, but just look at this. It's looking really, really good. So I'm extra pleased with that. I don't know what I'm gonna do when it comes time to having to do those spots, those rosettes. I gotta figure out a size and do all that. That's for sure. But that's for me to figure out, and then you to see me struggle with. That's the idea. So yeah, that's all I got for you on this one. I'm going to clean up the brush, clean up this whatever you call these things, dish. That's the word. Clean up the area a little bit, but you know, I don't need to be on stream for that. So if you watch this in the future and you made it this far, I hope you've commented your thoughts, and I look forward to hopefully catching you on, you know, while I'm live. So thanks so much, whoever's watching this, and until next time, take care.